I am a three-time loser. I voted for him three times. I believed in his vision. Now, I mean, everything is going wrong.
It looked good, like initially, and then it's like you woke up Monday morning and it's like, oh, we're bombing Iran now. Freaking gas is pushing $5 a gallon.
Hi again, everyone. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. It is not a good sign when some of your most loyal supporters start calling themselves losers for supporting you in the first place. That was part of a new focus group held by our friend Sarah Longwell of The Bulwark with Trump voters who feel abandoned and betrayed as Donald Trump ignores his campaign promises and doubles and triples down on the unpopular war with Iran. Many of them, like the rest of Americans, are increasingly alarmed by his behavior as well. Take a look.
I'm really getting concerned about the war in Iran, being in this situation where I've sold my house and I have this lump of money that I have, set aside to build my new house. And then we go to war in Iran and the prices are just going up, but my pile of money is not getting any bigger. Some of the stuff that's been happening is just so shocking and seemingly out of nowhere to me. The Venezuela situation or the war in Iran or just some of the other rhetoric. It's just really bizarre, and there's not a whole lot of good stuff happening.
So this thing that used to aid Trump, right, the blur of mayhem, is now hurting him with his own supporters. So as you can imagine, if his one-time voters are mad, the rest of the country, especially swing voters and independents, are furious. As we have been reporting, tens of thousands of Americans are on the streets today all across our country as they express their outrage at Donald Trump's policies and presidency. It is an outrage that is also revealing itself in new polling that for any politician, even Donald Trump, is devastating. A new Pew poll out today finds that just 34% of Americans approve of Donald Trump's performance as president. That is the lowest number Pew has registered for Donald Trump in his second term. It follows an AP poll that found just 33% of Americans approve of the job Donald Trump is doing as president. Those excruciatingly low numbers are driven in no small part by the war with Iran and its economic impacts. Case in point, today the Washington Post released this poll with the headline, quote, Trump's Iran war reaches Iraq and Vietnam era disapproval levels. Then it actually gets worse for Trump from the headline. The poll finds that 61% of Americans say that using military force against Iran was a mistake. 19% of all Americans say the U.S. actions in Iran have been successful. 19%. That's less than half of the self-described MAGA coalition that voted for Trump. For Americans already worried about their economic burdens and paying their bills, paying for food and gas and electricity, their fear and anxiety and the damage that Trump has done to the economy has tapped into something visceral, and it does not appear that it will recede anytime soon. 60% of Americans say they believe Donald Trump's war has increased our chances of the country heading into recession. Donald Trump's unforced error in Iran driving his poll numbers to their lowest ratings since he entered the political arena, with seemingly no end in sight, is where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Newly minted MS Now military analyst. I love that I get to say that. Lieutenant General Mark Hertling is here with us. We're so lucky and happy to have you in the family. He served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe. Also joining us, Media Matters for America President Angelo Carusone is back with us. We are equally happy to have you back today. And joining me at the table, New York Times opinion writer, political analyst Mara Gay. We are most happy to have you and have you here at the table. What's interesting is that, and I mean, Angelo and I have had this conversation for as long as I've known him, is that Trump defied gravity. It is as central to his political identity as anything to be immune from things like unpopularity or a base that will weigh in or render judgment. That, and I don't know what the future holds, but that period seems to be over.
Well, there's no question. The base seems to be collapsing in on the president. And I think a lot of this has to do with just how far Americans have fallen from a place of security in their day-to-day lives. It is remarkable if you look at all of the, there's the polls on the president, but you can also track the polls about what is happening. There's the numbers that Americans are dealing with, whether it's at the gas pump, the rent, housing. It's hard to buy healthcare. Well, Americans are, by the tens of thousands, losing their healthcare coverage because the subsidies have expired, and the Republicans in Congress allowed that. So by every measure, Americans are struggling. Daycare, education, it doesn't end. And I think the White House its response was to go to war in Iran and build a ballroom and start taking away voting rights. So I think there's a growing sense that Donald Trump, has sold a false sale of goods, of bills to his own base. Other Americans saw what he promised, I think, with clearer eyes, honestly. But I think even those in his base are saying, wait a second, I may not have liked everything else, but I thought gas was going to be cheaper. I thought there was going to be more money in my wallet. Mm-hmm. I thought he was going to drain the swamp and bring clarity to the Epstein files. No, he has reneged on all of those promises and instead is, I think, going to war because it's desperate, it's a distraction, and it's making Americans even angrier. And I think it also just highlights the visceral anger Americans have across the political spectrum toward billionaires, toward the oligarchy, corporations that are taking, increasingly large shares of Americans' wallet. And I think that is finally starting to bring Donald Trump's once gravity-defying run to an end. And I do think there's a sense of panic. He's not quite sure what to do. And I think it's too late in some ways to pivot at this point ahead of the midterms. And as we've talked about before, he doesn't care what happens to the Republicans in Congress necessarily, whose seats are on the line. He cares more about himself. But I think you've got to be thinking that this is destroying your legacy, if nothing else. I mean, I would just appeal to him, it's not too late to be a better president. Americans are hurting. You care about your legacy. Just change course now. I really don't have a lot of hope that he cares about day-to-day Americans. At the same time, we know he does care about his own perception. He's deeply sensitive in that way to public opinion. So I'm just heartbroken to see Americans suffering in this way. And obviously, then the Supreme Court decision that came down this week, gutting the Voting Rights Act, that is just another sign that Americans realize their democracy is being taken away. And all the while, the president seems to be perfectly insulated in his ballroom. So the disconnect is growing. Reality is coming for this president. And it's uglier and uglier.
Angelo, there can be, I think the inverse is also starting to happen, right? Like people who've covered Donald Trump's assault on the rule of law and his effort to politicize the military day in and day out for 10 years kind of missed how unpopular the brand became with large swaths of the country. I mean, Trump has been underwater with independents for almost a year. Trump has been underwater on immigration, economy, inflation, tariffs for almost a year. Trump is now more underwater on foreign policy than at any point in 10 years. Trump, I think, is sort of nearing, Bush 43 numbers on approval. He left office at 32%. Two serious polls have him at 33%. This is the third. The country has sort of logged back in, taken the measure of the second term, and said, thank you, no.
Yeah, and I want to actually put an exclamation point on that and also acknowledge something that you were saying a year ago. Because it was a year ago when the vibes were, when Trump had narrative dominance completely, when the rest of the right-wing echo chamber was behind him, so they were spinning his stories. And for a large part of the country, despite the fact that the policies were unpopular, the vibes were great because they were Trump supporters. And at that point, revenge was a priority, and they just loved it. They loved how much he was owning the libs and how much he was making the media mad, and the vibes were great for them. And it felt like he was unstoppable. But the thing that you were pointing out then was that eventually reality is going to have to set in. These people are going to have to drive to work. They're going to have to go to the store. And the policies are so fundamentally disconnected from their lives that even if they have fidelity for Trump or loyalty to Trump, that they're going to have to marry that with the reality of their lives. And what you're seeing right now is sort of playing out in those polls is that a large part of these people, of his current supporters, they're no longer willing to ignore the things that are sort of cutting against them because their vibes aren't great anymore and the costs have gotten so high. I mean, I was listening to the beginning of the segment when you're playing all those people from the Bulwark. And I'll tell you, that sounds a lot like right-wing talk radio right now, the callers. I mean, it's not that disconnected. They're calling, they may not be as sharp. They don't let on some of those people that are directly connected to Trump, although it gets through. But they are griping about the same thing. Because when the Iran war started, the gas price was under $3, and now they're more than $4. And to your point, independents were already there. A large part of the country that are considered double haters, people that don't like both parties, pox on both houses. Republicans are losing them by more than 30 points right now. That trend started last summer. That didn't just start because of the Iran war, like we're seeing with Trump supporters. That trend amongst those sort of movable, more dynamic parts of the voter base, that started a year ago. And so the seeds were already sown. And that's the reality that we're living in now. It's a different context. And to put a sort of a fine point on all of it, a bow on all of it, in many ways, Trump has been extraordinary. He's defied the laws of gravity. He's defied in the opposite direction, too. As you noted with President Bush, it was 8 years before he got to that number. With Carter, it was a whole term. With Trump, it's 15 months.